Welcome to this week's edition of the Reporter Roundtable here on the Red River Farm Network. I'm Don Wick, joined by Kira Hart, Megan Overby, and Randy Coonan. And again, another busy news week, a lot of activities. We've all been on the road and covering a lot of different activities. Megan, let's start with you. One thing that's been very much anticipated has been this Senate hearing dealing with what's going on in the cattle markets, talk of market manipulation and consolidation in the packing industry, those kind of things. You covered that hearing. What came out of that session?
Yes, well, it was definitely a long-awaited conversation that took place Wednesday, as you said, in the Senate Agriculture Committee, and it lasted 3 hours. So there was plenty of things to share, and their testimony was limited. But of course, a lot of questions were asked by the lawmakers themselves, and especially when you have that group of producers and experts in the room, now is as good a time as any. And so this did come on the heels of growing conversations about the cattle markets across the country, which essentially started almost 2 years ago when we started running into some supply chain issues, starting with that fire in Holcomb, Kansas. And so the hearing did address a wide range of issues, including price discovery, differing industry views, and how they achieve this price discovery. It also covered some market transparency and oversight, and then, of course, beef processing capacity. So representing cattle producers were two of them. Justin Tupper from St. Aug, South Dakota. He was representing the U.S. Cattlemen's Association as well, along with Mark Gardner, who is from Kansas. He runs a Angus operation there, as well as representing NCBA. And so both of them did agree and noted the importance of price discovery and that it does need to be achieved. However, the parties did disagree about how to best ensure adequate levels of cash trade to support it. And so, of course, then we brought in 3 ag economists that testified as well, and they shared some supporting research, somebody from Kansas State, another from the University of Missouri, and the final one from Rabobank. And so, but we didn't learn anything that was too new. The conversation has to start somewhere. And there is some legislation that has been introduced in the Senate already that would expand local meat processing and require a minimum of 50% of the weekly beef slaughter volume to be purchased in the open or spot market. And so really, I think these lawmakers just wanted to hear from the producers, the people in the industry themselves, just to, help better make this decision process, more fluent moving forward.
Megan, with the diverse people that were involved in this, is there plans for ongoing dialogue? Did they say anything about that at all?
So they did not, but just within the past couple months, there have been 2 major forms of dialogue that have happened where we have the NCBAs, we have the U.S. Cattlemen's, different parties that have different views, but they all came together and at least agreed that, points A, B, and C need to be achieved. I haven't heard anything official, but I reckon that these groups probably will have to come back together again at some point, especially as this legislation does move through the chain, if you will, just to get on the same page and kind of work out some of those disagreements, in a table, in the same room at the same time.
There's been other issues going on Capitol Hill. An agreement announced yesterday between some folks in Congress and the White House, President Biden making the announcement on infrastructure. Kara, that's certainly something we've been talking about for some time as well.
We've been waiting a long time for a deal to be reached on infrastructure. The $1.2 trillion deal is less than the $2.3 trillion that President Biden had initially proposed. Included in that agreed upon framework, and this was just framework that was agreed upon, the details still have to be worked out, but there's investments in broadband internet, of course, the typical infrastructure things we think about when it comes to repairing roads and bridges. There's also some talk about electric vehicles. We also saw some of the Biden administration's other priorities kind of trickle into this just a little bit, including some efforts on climate too. And President Biden was trying to kind of shape a message after this meeting that bipartisanship is still alive in Washington, D.C., and this was a bipartisan agreement, but we'll have to see what happens going forward. If you follow ag policy, I'm sure that you know that he really campaigned on the bipartisanship as he was coming into office. For the first few months, I mean, Republicans would beg to differ whether or not something was bipartisan or not. So we'll see how this continues. Agriculture is watching these infrastructure decisions and discussions. They want to be at the table, and they still plan to be. Farmers are wondering, what is the pay for? How do you pay for something like an infrastructure bill, especially $1.2 trillion? That's a lot of money. And the administration said they'll finance this through closing tax gaps, redirecting unspent emergency relief funds, corporate user fees, and the macroeconomic impact of infrastructure investment. But agriculture is like, just make sure it doesn't impact us too much on taxes. It's something I think will be interesting to continue to watch in Washington, D.C. That was one thing. Yesterday, we also saw movement on the Growing Climate Solutions Act in the Senate that rather passed on a vote of 92-8. This legislation would certainly be helping farmers take part in carbon markets. Now it goes, I guess the House has a version now too that has to move. It could be trickier to move in the House. As soon as the Senate passed that legislation yesterday, on Thursday, House Agriculture Committee Ranking Member G.T. Thompson came out with a statement saying the Senate's version of the bill is a big government solution in search of a problem. He is supporting other solutions to address climate change, including 5 bills ranging from forest management and private funding for targeted conservation initiatives. So we'll see how this continues, this climate change discussion too. But infrastructure, taxes, and climate change, really big efforts from the Biden administration that we continue to see unfold. And I guess we'll keep watching that as we move throughout his first year of his term.
Obviously, roads, bridges, broadband, all very important to us in rural America. Activities still going on in St. Paul as well. We're winding down the special session. Wednesday is when we need to get things wrapped up on budgets and such. Agriculture has been one of the early wins here. We've got an ag bill that's been passed by both chambers, and now it's on to Governor Walz's desk. What are we seeing in St. Paul, Kara?
Yeah, Don, you and I have been really monitoring this week and had a chance to visit with ag lobbyist Bruce Clavin and also Minnesota Corn Growers Association's Amanda Billick this week. Amanda and I didn't get too much into the weeds on anything else other than that ag bill. I think the corn growers really like some of the ethanol provisions and biofuel provisions, what it could mean for the future of biofuels in the state of Minnesota. But when it comes to the other things, I thought it was interesting. I visited with Bruce quite a bit during this session, and right as soon as we wrapped up the actual session of the legislature, right before the special session was called, he didn't seem too optimistic that deals could be reached by the June 30th deadline. It sounds like that's changing. When Minnesota legislature is taking on some of the easier to pass bills and kind of working their way up. Here, the Senate passed the environment bill Tuesday night. The House is expected to take that up later today. Many of the policy provisions in the environment bill were dropped, including one surrounding the California Clean Cars legislation. It sounds like, according to Clavin, that Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is going to move forward with a rulemaking. They're not going to do it in a policy, going through the legislature kind of thing. So I don't think that discussion's over yet. It just looks slightly different than it did, a few weeks ago. And then the transportation bill that just passed, I know Don had mentioned that we're watching that on a federal and a local level. This bill for Minnesota includes language to support the proposed soybean crush plant in Crookston, Minnesota, allowing some of those trucks to be able to haul the byproducts whenever it opens in the next few years. So a really key piece to this session, and more to unfold within the next few days. So we'll keep watching. We've got a few more days left of this session, so hopefully they'll meet their deadline of June 30th to get all these budget bills passed. If they don't, then I guess Minnesota goes into a shutdown. But it sounds like we're not really headed toward that, not likely as much, but again, we'll see what happens.
We're all boosters of 4-H and FFA. I think it's interesting to note there's a a new special license plate that is coming that will support the youth programs with 4-H and FFA here in Minnesota too on that transportation bill. We always like to talk markets, Randy. We always say how volatile things are. It's certainly same song and dance that we've got this week in the marketplace.
Boy, that's for sure. A little bit of rain in the forecast, and boy, things headed south in a hurry here this week. But looks like we've got with a crop report coming up on Wednesday, that planted acreage report. A lot of traders are saying people are tending to forget the quarterly stocks report, which is probably as important or probably even more important. And that's historically where our big market swings have come out of, has been that quarterly stocks report. And then follow that up with the 4th of July holiday. Of course, the 4th on a Sunday this year. So we have the Monday, the 5th is the day that the trade takes off. So no trade there. And typically that 4th of July holiday also is when most traders do take the day off. So we've got a true 3-day holiday weekend going on there. Right as we approach pollination for a bulk of the Midwest for that corn market. So weather becomes extremely important here. And right now with the rains moving through, they're taking a little bit of risk premium off, although we are a little bit choppy here today with corn trading both sides of unchanged here. Soybean market has been kind of bouncing around some support levels here as well, and kind of range bound. The wheat market, it's been all Minneapolis wheat, and that's just been weather. This Minneapolis wheat crop is in dire need of some water, if it'll even help it anymore. It's looking more like we're going to see a partial crop. Some guys have been talking about this could be like the 1988 crop where we saw about 12, 15 bushel per acre, something back then, and then prices shot way up. One thing about spring wheat, that high quality protein wheat, is the demand is very inelastic, which means they don't have any choice. They have to use wheat. And no matter what the price is to get those blending requirements. So that's the one thing about spring wheat that everybody's kind of watching here, is seeing what kind of crop we do get, what kind of acres we're going to have as well.
Hey, Randy, looking at that report next week, do you get a sense of maybe what's changed? What are traders thinking has changed since that planted acreage estimates versus actually what happened and what got into the ground?
The Wall Street Journal came out with their average estimates here this morning, or late yesterday, and then this morning. Most traders are expecting around 94 million acres of corn. That compares to 91 in that March report from USDA. Soybeans are expected to be about 1 million acres more than the March report, 88.9, 89 million, somewhere in there. Wheat acres are expected to be down about 500,000 here at almost 46, 6 million acres. And the big unknown for traders is the drought. That tended to change up acreage mix, especially in the spring wheat. They don't know how many acres of spring wheat maybe have gotten torn up and maybe planted to something else, if something else would even grow. And then it all becomes an insurance issue at that point as well. But the acreage mix, they're expecting an increase in acres. Plus, we've got about 10 million acres of prevent plant from last year, and they're probably around 8 million of that maybe got put into production again this year. So we could potentially see some bigger acres than what the trade is expecting.
And then the demand picture too. Didn't we get news earlier this week that China's back buying more U.S. soybeans? And
yeah, they bought U.S. soybeans. They've been out of the corn market. We did have another flash sale this morning, but that was soybean meal to Mexico. But it's been kind of piece and parcel. They'll buy a little bit here, a little bit there, and it's all been new crop. And then, matter of fact, this morning's with Mexico, half new crop and half for the 22-23 marketing year. So they're forward buying here. So again, with China slowly coming back, the bigger reason there, I think, is China's hog herd has been, we're back to almost pre-COVID numbers and pre-swine flu numbers in China. Which maybe means less pork demand, but maybe a little more soybean meal demand.
Well, with these markets, weather obviously is a huge story. We continue to watch, and we're watching the crops. We've all been out and about in fields and on the phones talking to farmers and seeing firsthand what is happening. There's been some spotty showers that have moved through. Maybe that'll help out corn and soybeans. But Megan, what are you seeing as far as the wheat crop? It might be a little bit too late to too little too late at this point.
Yes, well, and I'm glad you bring wheat up because, of course, the markets are starting to pay more and more attention to what is going on with the wheat crop. And talking with University of Minnesota Extension small grain specialist Joachim Wiersma, the main concern during the reproductive phase for spring wheat is water usage by the crop. So up till this point, say wheat, for example, the example he gave was at the 5-leaf stage. Even at 90-degree air temps, it only uses about 1/10 of an inch of precip per day. And of course, some places that have got a lot of rain do have that soil moisture reserve in the ground. But at grain fill, which is where we're at right now or shortly coming to, that demand for water usage nearly doubles. So how Joachim summed it all up is we do need rain, but he is keeping the glass half full instead of half empty. And there is a lot of built-in plasticity with that crop. And so if conditions are still favorable, say we are going to catch some just spotty rains in places, that head will try to make 3 to 4 kernels per spikelet. But if water becomes limiting or it's already limited, well, it may only make a couple or none at all in some cases. And so, long story short, if we have a little bit of canopy during grain fill, the wheat will make bigger kernels. And if we have moisture, if not, well, again, like Randy mentioned in some of his market talk, we're really not going to know what we have for a crop until it's either in the bin or it's not.
Yeah, good point. Randy, you've been talking to farmers too. I'm curious on corn and soybeans. Are we catching up? What's happening with those crops?
As far as the way the moisture is going, soybeans don't take a lot of moisture here right now. So most of that crop is holding its own, hanging on. Corn market, the corn crop itself, you'll see those starting to pineapple or roll a little easier here when we get these hotter temperatures. So the corn crop could use a little more moisture here. Again, with limited subsoil moisture, we're going to need water here, especially in July, and that makes the corn crop when we start getting into pollination. Also, temperatures as well is going to be critically important here as we work our way in through July as far as pollination goes. But for the most part, Don, I think the corn right now, everything's kind of holding its own. We can buy a lot of time. One thing we don't really know is the new genetics on this corn crop. A lot of drought tolerance is built into this crop without really even knowing about it. And we've never had to test it before. And this is going to be that test year, I think, to see how that new genetics turn out.
Very good point.
Yeah. Well, and
Hey,
Don,
Don.
too,
Oh, go ahead.
if I can add, we talk about the corn, soybeans, and wheat, but farmers are starting to cut alfalfa too this week, which, if they have any to cut out there. And, just talking with a few farmer ranchers, particularly at Linton, Tom Bernhardt there said that the alfalfa this week that he started cutting will be about half the amount compared to a typical year. Same in some places in northeastern South Dakota. So that's another thing too. This hay and forage market could get very interesting very quick, especially when you move over to the Minnesota side where we have a lot of dairies needing that forage. And quite frankly, it's just not there in places.
Is that the same thing too for the meadow hay, Megan?
It depends. If it's a straight alfalfa, dryland alfalfa, that honestly got hurt pretty bad in May when we stayed so cool for so long. We had some frost. That set it back. I know even on our farm here, there's a dryland alfalfa we're not going to be able to cut because it hasn't even grown past the residual from last year. So there's nothing to cut out there unless you want to throw a rock through your disc vine. That's about all you get. The grass hay or more like CRP type mix, I think that has fared a little bit better. That grass is pretty resilient compared to the alfalfa. A lot of guys are out there cutting that right now in hopes that they'll get a rain and maybe they can get something out of it after.
Jared, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, I wanted to add, and I know we talked about wheat at the very beginning. I do want to say that there are areas in the Dakotas, especially in that Oneida, South Dakota area, where farmers are already starting to zero out that wheat crop. So I think they already kind of know maybe that they don't have anything there. And we visited with Tim Lucan with Oahe Grain, and he was talking about how he thought in the next week to 10 days, there may be farmers more that decide to kind of zero, if they can, zero out the wheat crop. In North Dakota, you kind of have a mix of a little bit of everything, but I think most of the crop is not good to excellent condition, especially if you look at the weekly crop progress report. As Megan mentioned, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few weeks. So I just wanted to make sure we added that piece about the Dakotas. I know a lot of people, like Megan said, are watching what's happening with the small grains.
Speaking of getting a look at the crop, the past few years, I've had the opportunity to tag along with Tommy Gersafi from Advanced Marketing for our Boots on the Ground tour. And we've looked at different parts of the country. And first year, I think we did a lot of the I-states, Indiana, Illinois, went into Ohio. Last year, we looked at a lot of that PP ground. This year, the drought obviously is the story. And so we're going to be concentrating on some of those D3 and D4 counties and areas that are really suffering from the drought situation. So we're going to be hitting the road that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the week of July 5th. So whatever the dates are, again, thinking right in front of me, I think it must be the 7th, 8th, and 9th. So be watching for that, boots on the ground here on the Red River Farm Network. And one other note, it's always fun to give people a pat on the back. Minnesota is going to have a gentleman in line to be president of the National Corn Growers Association. Tom Hague elected as the first vice president. He's only the second Minnesotan. Gerald Tumbleson in 2006 was president of the National Corn Growers Association. I was kind of surprised when I heard that stat with all the leaders we have in Minnesota, but congratulations to Tom Hague getting in that chain for the NCGA. So those are some of the stories we're looking at this week with our Reporter Roundtable. As always, you can follow us online, www.rrfn.com, social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and of course, on our 21 radio stations all across Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. On behalf of Kira Hart, Megan Overby, and Randy Kuhn, and I'm Don Wick. This is the Red River Farm Network.